Hi everybody. This video is going to talk about academic articles in general. So you may be familiar with academic articles from your English 102 class or from other classes. This video is going to talk about academic articles specifically in the context of literary studies. And the reason I'm doing this is, first of all, for this week, you're going to be reading an academic article on kindred. But then also at the end of this class, you're going to be needing to write a short paper about an academic article, and you're also going to be needing to write a long paper that incorporates two academic articles. So it's important for you to understand sort of what academic articles are, how they sort of fit into journals, which is another term that you're probably familiar with, and then begin thinking about some strategies that you can use when you read academic articles. So the first question that we need to talk about is, what is an academic article? So as I say on this slide, an academic article is a scholarly article, and usually it's between 20 to 30 pages, sometimes a little bit shorter, sometimes a little bit longer, that was published in an academic journal. And there's an image on the slide that shows the picture of the first page of an academic article. In fact, this is one that you are reading. So you have the author's name at the top, and that is the name of the author who wrote the article. And then you have the title of the article, which is Kindred, History, Revision, and Rememory of Bodies. So that is, and then below that you have sort of the main text. So that is the article that has a title that was written by a person. And this article was published in an academic journal. So that raises the next question, which is, what is an academic journal? So an academic journal is a type of periodical, and by periodical I mean something that's published on regular intervals, like a magazine or a newspaper. And each issue of a journal contains several articles. And an issue of a journal may also contain other types of publications. So it may have short opinion pieces, interviews, and book reviews. And the image that you see on this slide is the picture of the cover of the issue of the journal that last article was published in. So that article by Gregory Hampton was published in a journal that's called Obsidian 3, Literature in the African Diaspora. And this is a picture of the cover of that specific issue. So in that issue, there was the article by Gregory Hampton, but there was also a lot of other articles. And I believe there was also an interview and also some book reviews. So just to sort of reiterate what I said, an academic journal is a specific kind of periodical, so similar to a magazine. And in that, every time it comes out, and it comes out usually twice a year, or maybe 3 times a year, or maybe 4 times a year, every time it comes out, there's going to be articles by different authors in it. So articles are published in journals. And then the last question that I want us to consider is, how are our academic journals different from other periodicals, such as magazines? So there's a couple ways that they're different. One difference is their audience. So unlike magazines or newspapers, which are aimed at a general audience, academic journals are aimed at scholars. This means usually professors and also graduate students, and also some upper division regular students, or upper division undergraduate students in specific fields. So they're not aimed at a general audience. They're not aimed at anybody. They're aimed at a highly specific audience. And because they're aimed at a specific audience, they often use specialized language, and the authors usually assume that their readers have a baseline of expertise in the field of study. So they assume that their readers have sort of a basic knowledge of the field. So they don't take the time to explain every term or explain the background of sort of every work. They may provide sort of footnotes or references to that readers can follow if they want to learn more, if they feel like they need to get background information, but that's not necessarily actually part of the article. Another even more important difference is that academic journals are peer-reviewed. So this means that authors, or rather articles, must be evaluated by experts in the field before they're published. So if I wanted to publish something in a journal, I would write it and then I would send it to the journal, and then the journal would send it to usually 2 other experts in the field, and those experts have to read it. They have to agree that this meets sort of a high standard of scholarship, and then they tell the editors of the journal that yes, this is good enough to be published. So it goes through a pretty lengthy process. And that process can usually takes, at least in the field of literature, takes several months. And it's not uncommon for this process to take years. There's a lot of going back and forth before an article is sort of deemed good enough to be published. So they have to meet a really high standard in order to be published. And then a last difference that I think is worth noting is that academic journals are actually pretty expensive. So the general public usually doesn't have access to them. If I'm not affiliated with a university, so if I don't have a WSU ID and password, I can't just go and get a copy of Obsidian 3, which is the journal that Gregory Hampton's article is published in. If I wanted to get it, I would have to pay money for it. And these journals are actually surprisingly expensive. So our library actually pays hundreds of thousands of dollars to get access to all of the academic journals that it gets access to. So this is a resource that's really only available to professors and students who are affiliated with the university. So in addition to being targeted at professors and students, it's usually only professors and students have access to these kinds of articles. Okay, so now that I've explained what an academic article is and what a journal is, I'm going to talk a little bit about how to read academic articles. So every article is different, and you may need different strategies to read different articles. However, there's some useful starting points that you can keep in mind to help you make sense of articles as you read them. So the first thing that you should do when you are reading an article is to look for the thesis. So just like you, authors of articles are expected to foreground their central argument, and they usually do that in the introduction. And they usually do that in 2 or 3 sentences that sum up their major argument. In other words, they do that in a thesis. So when you're reading, you can look for that thesis and even annotate, so even mark that thesis, so you can remind yourself about what their central argument is. Another useful thing to do is to look for how the author responds to other scholars. So again, similar to you, scholars are expected to reference other scholars in their field. So when they publish something, they are expected to be talking about how what they're doing is related to what other people are doing. And there's a couple ways that they do this. One way is that they will summarize someone else's position. So they will summarize what somebody else says, and then they will explain how they're building on that position. So they will say, person X says this thing, and I am adding to what they said in this way. The other way that they will do this is that they will summarize someone's position and then explain how they are disagreeing with it. So you can look for instances of that, and that can also help you to understand how they are shaping their argument and how they are situating what they're saying in relation to what other people have already said on the same subject. Another thing that you can and should do is to try to figure out and then follow the organization of the article. And a lot of authors make this really easy because articles are usually longer than the papers that you write for a class. They usually will divide it up into sections, and they will even have headings for those sections. So when you are reading it, you can sort of keep an eye on what point they are making in each one of these sections, and then try to, as you are figuring out what those points are, be thinking about how those points support their larger point or support their thesis. And then the final thing that you can do is to annotate and take lots of notes. So most of your professors, including me, mark up articles as they read them. We underline things, we circle things, we star sentences that seem important, we scribble keywords in the margins, and we may summarize points as we read. This is something that I do. So, as I'm reading and I feel like I've gotten a grasp on what an author is saying, I will just summarize it in the margin so that I have it there and I can come back to it and I don't have to remember what the writer said, right? I already have my own note that reminds me what they said. And as I say here on the slide, this way that you, if you're doing this, you don't have to keep track of every idea in your head. And when you when you sit down to write about the article later, you've already have the most important parts marked, and you already have notes that sort of will help you remember about what you thought was important and what you thought they were saying. So these are some strategies that you can use when you are reading the article that is assigned for this week. And these are also some strategies that you can use when you are reading articles that are assigned later in this class and when you are reading articles for your paper at the end of the semester. So if you have any questions, let me know. And otherwise, we'll look forward to seeing what you guys have to say about the article for this week.